Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this very interesting session called Song Sung Blue. It's very hard to associate with pop culture, which is usually seen as very youthful and largely free of ideology, mostly about entertainment, mostly about fun. It's hard to think of that as also seriously ideological driven and in fact having very serious consequences in terms of impact and in terms of influence. And yet this book, H-pop, written by a journalist, Kunal Purohit, tells us exactly what's happening in the world of Hindutva-driven pop culture. And he covers three very different areas. He covers pop music, songs that have gone viral and are widely heard and followed in many places of India. And he covers somebody who is a poet and uses poetry as his weapon to spread a less sort of message of hatred and othering. And a third person who is using the print medium, right? Printing and the printing press and a publishing format to spread the same message. So this is like three different aspects of reaching out at a popular culture level to spread a certain kind of message. So I would like to, everyone's been introduced, so they know who the panel is. I'd like to invite Kunal to talk a little bit about what drove him to write this book, since I'm assuming most people here haven't yet read it. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to the book and perhaps read something, and then we get into a discussion on the book.
Thank you so much, Anjum. It's such a pleasure to be here in Kolkata. It's a city I dearly love, and to be seated among such stalwarts. The book, as you said, rightly sort of looks at how popular culture has been weaponized. And the book has come about, Anjum, as a result of my journalistic experiences. I've been an independent journalist for about 16, 17 years now, but the last 6, 7 years is when I've really focused on tracking hate crimes, on tracking religion-driven and religion-fueled hate crimes, be it mob lynchings, be it violence, be it riots, be it clashes. And it's in that process that, a question would always sort of worry me, which is that why were people like me in the media looking at these as events? So each time there was a lynching, we would look at that as an event that has occurred, and then we would report on it. We would report on it for a couple of days, and then we would sort of forget about it and move on. In the reporting that I saw, I didn't see that we were really focused on the process that was leading up to these instances, right? So one of the things that I realized when I went back, and in my reporting, I would often go back to the sites of these hate crimes, sometimes, weeks later, sometimes months later. And one of the things that I would do is try and understand what happened before the process. It's in that reporting that I realized that music, and this is an instance that I'll tell you about, music was actually playing a role in somewhere driving a wedge between communities. I was in Jharkhand in a town called Gumla, and in that town is there's a Ram Navami procession that sort of takes place every year on Ram Navami. And that particular year, when I was covering the hate crime, I saw that when the procession came to the mosque, to the sort of the main mosque of the town, they started playing a song which no one had ever heard about in that town. And the song's words said to the effect, "Mulle ki topi gira do," right? Knock the skull cap off the cleric's head. Now, when the locals heard this song, they were outraged, and they'd never heard it before. And in that moment, a very syncretic tradition, which was that the Ram Navami procession would come to the mosque. The local Muslims would come out, would offer refreshments, would shower petals and things. All of that just went out of the window. In that moment, thankfully, the police intervened, and before things could spiral out of control, the police intervened and shut the music down. But some of the people who were a part of the procession that evening, when they were going back home, about 2 or 3 kilometers away from the mosque, they see a Muslim young man talking to a Hindu girl. And in that moment, they're so roused with passions and with anger that they drag him to an electric pole, they tie him up and accuse him of love jihad, right? They accuse him of trying to lure the Hindu girl away, of converting her. And as a result of their accusation, so angry is this group that they tie him up and they assault him till he falls dead. He dies that evening. And that moment really, Anjum, was the point where I sort of wanted to, dive deeper into this and really try and understand what were these kinds of songs, because I had never come across any of these songs. And this is way back in 2019. So, that's where I started looking at how music as a form of popular culture had been weaponized. And I mean, to my horror, I found that that wasn't the only song, that there was a full-grown industry of sorts, which was churning out these songs which at its roots sought to create a very permanent sense of an anti-Muslim bias in the listeners. Right? The songs were meant to target Muslims, they were meant to dehumanize them, they were meant to vilify them, they were meant to threaten Muslims with violence, with actions of all kinds. And sort of that is when the discovery that is when the book was also born in some ways. I didn't want to stop there. I didn't want to sort of end at whether it was only music that was doing it. And I started looking at other forms of popular culture. That is when I discovered that it's not just music, it is also poetry, as you said, Anjum. Especially in the north and west of India, where, poetry recitals, Kavi Sammelans as they are called, are an extremely popular form of entertainment. And what I saw when I traveled across all of these places for 4 years is that a lot of poets were now taking up Hindutva poetry, right? Which was essentially recycling Hindutva beliefs and churning them out in verses and rhymes. So that was the second part. And the third aspect of the story that my book looks at is the publishing industry. There are now dedicated publishers who only publish books which will again sort of, peddle the Hindutva thought and in the Hindutva ideology. It will seek to legitimize a lot of the myths and the conspiracies among the Hindu right wing. These are very, very popular books. So in the book, I've looked at 3 characters, one singer, one poet, and one publisher. And the publisher who I've profiled in the book manages to sell 25,000 odd copies every year, right? Trying to sort of peddle the Hindutva line of thought over and over again. So clearly this was something that was an extremely vibrant and an extremely popular sort of genre of popular culture that was being created. And that is when really the book was born, Anjum.
Okay. Thank you. I think that what he's pointed to is what is happening at the moment right now. While I was listening to him, I was thinking that this is not a new or isolated phenomena. If you look back over history, over the 20th century, you'll find that many communities have similarly taken to popular culture to other and dehumanize whoever it is that they have targeted as being outside the fold. Different religions have done it, different communities have done it. So, but it's a very disturbing phenomenon. And one of the things that struck me, and I was talking to Rahul about this, is that it's almost as if there's a decision somewhere psychologically to move away from evidence, proof, fact, rationality, logic, common sense, and just decide to believe. This is what I want to believe. And in that respect, I was asking if you would like to read something to share it, because again, the remarkable thing about this book is that it's written by a journalist. So it's a book that goes into deep investigation, based on source, based on fact, based on interviews. And that's what makes it even more hard-hitting. So please.
Oh, thank you, Anjum. So I will read the section about the singer that I told you about, the one who's making music which is targeted towards Muslims to a large extent. Her name is Kavi Singh. Um, this is really sort of the introductory part of her profile. Kavi's career might only be 4 years old, but her belief in herself and the ideology underpinning her work feels unshakable. Take, for instance, her raison d'etre, which is to shake Hindus out of complacency against the existential threats that Islam poses. Hindus are complacent, she says, because they are busy getting jobs and fighting to move ahead in lives. But they, she tells me, they don't do this. They just think, let's increase our population, kill the Hindus, and all this will be ours, she tells me, referring to Muslims. The only thing, she tells me, the only thing they believe in is to increase the country's Jansankhya, its population. But Kavi's fears don't resonate with facts. Data from the Indian census study of 2011 showed that the rate of growth of the Muslim population had fallen by nearly 5% over the last few decades, whereas the rate of growth among Hindus had fallen by just 3.1%. Various experts have dismissed the possibilities of the country's Muslim population ever taking over its Hindu population, insisting that for that to happen, Hindus would have to stop producing babies altogether. A report by the Pew Research Center in its estimates for 2050 said that Hindus were likely to remain an overwhelming majority with a 77% share of the population, while Muslims would grow to only 18% of the population, less than a quarter of the Hindu population. But Kavi believes in these fears anyway. In January 2020, while the country saw widespread street protests against against the Modi government's introduction of the discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, which fast-tracked the citizenship of only non-Muslim refugees from neighboring countries, Kavi made her fears known with a song named Sache Hindustani, Jansankhya Kanun Lao, Desh Bachao, which means true Indians usher in the population control law and save the country. The song vilified the protesters as anti-nationals, warned of anarchy and an Islamic takeover of the country, and pitched a bill to regulate the country's population as the answer to all of this. Her confidence is backed by her firm belief that she has been ordained by divine forces to carry out this mission. Her life hasn't occurred by accident. She tells me that somewhere Bhagwan, God, has planted these thoughts inside me.
Thank you. Sandip, you have actually read the book and you've recently engaged with Kunal. So, would you like to share your thoughts about any responses or what you...
Actually, as I was listening to Kunal and listening to what you said, some thoughts came up which I would love Kunal or Ruchir to address. Like, number one is, as a journalist, when you're working, you read this section out about how Kavi's belief that the Muslim population growth rate is going to overwhelm Hindus is completely false. Now, as a journalist telling the story, when she is telling you this, would you at that moment stop her and say, but that's not true? In fact, this is, what you've written in the book. Or as a journalist, did you feel compelled that I need to stay back and let her be in her beliefs right there? Because I think that's like sort of an interesting dilemma that as the writer in you and the journalist in you must grapple with.
So I think over the years, journalists, sort of tend to perfect these dilemmas that we carry all the time because, as the old sort of saying about journalism goes, you should be able to interview, the king, the prisoner, the rapist, the drug addict, everyone, without judging them for the actions. Because I think the larger point is that you have to have a story to tell people. In conversations like these, for the most part, I would push back in the sense that if there was a very clear factual rebuttal of the claims that not just Kavi, but all of the other subjects would also make, I would gently tell them that, but this isn't really supported by facts. So there was that conversation, but I would, for the most part, ensure that it never got out of hand, where it didn't turn into an argument, it didn't turn into a dispute, because, I mean, I believe that, I was there as a journalist to tell the story, not to act on my ideological leanings, not to sort of, put my politics forward, because I don't think that is really important. That's not important for our understanding of what's happening in the country. In fact, one of the reasons why we've got here is because journalists have started believing that they're more important than the story. So I was very clear that I didn't want to fall into the trap. I am not bigger than the story. The story is the thing that I was there for, and hence my ideological differences, be that as may, would have to be limited to conversations.
But that also leads me to a larger question, I think, which is for all of us, where I was wondering, when you said the publisher sells, what, 25,000 copies, you said, right? The Kavi Sammelan draws thousands of people. Now, when these people are so popular and have such a following, and this is therefore definitely part of the culture that's going on around the country, is it, like, can we raise this question as to why these people, why that publisher, why that poet is not part of, say, the lit fests that are happening around the country? Or, as people having the lit fest, the fact that so much of this poetry and writing is driving a wedge between communities, reason enough not to include them. I don't know.
Well, I think they may be part of LitFest in different parts of the country. They're working in a different language, and we don't really know what the ecosystems are where they're working. Maybe if they were very popular people here in our part of the country, they may well have been included, if it for no other reason, but to see what they have to say and talk about it. Ruchir, would you like to comment on, on the book or on the issue? I mean,
I had a question, which is, we're seeing a lot of things that have either surfaced and come to our attention or actually just started happening in the last 10 years since 2014. So is this phenomenon an old phenomenon that's suddenly become more enlarged, more amplified? Or is it something completely new? What's the genealogy of it?
Yeah, even I'm curious about that.
Where do these young kids start suddenly saying, hey, I want to write a song about killing Muslims or whatever,
And also, is it only restricted to one religion is the other thing, or does it happen the other way around as well?
Yes, that's a good question as well.
Yeah.
So, couple of things. I mean, one, I'll quickly respond to what you said, Sandip. These people are very much part of a different, it feels like a different world, right? But they are very much part of the cultural events that happen in smaller towns, sometimes even in bigger cities. So, they're often invited to festivals, to cultural occasions where they perform to packed audiences, and I've been to some of them. In fact, I remember with the poet Kamal Agne, who's the subject of the book, I traveled with him all the way to Patna, where he was invited, where the organizers, much like a festival like this, the organizers, sort of foot his bills, they host him in a very good hotel, they fly him down, and then they ask him to perform in front of packed audiences. So this is something that does happen a lot, maybe just not in the spaces that you and I would be finding ourselves in. In terms of its origins, Ruchir, music, poetry, and books. They've all been used to peddle different political ideologies before as well. And Gita Press, for instance, comes to mind when it comes to publishing. I think what has changed in the last 10 years or so is that a lot of the rhetoric that you now find in this pop culture was rhetoric that was always mentioned in hushed tones or in whispers or in very small settings or very sort of. For instance, there was a very poetic sort of slogan, even during the Ram Mandir movement back in the late 80s and the early 90s. So poetry has been used, so have songs. There have been songs that were associated with the movement. But what has changed now is that the scale at which it is happening is way more than than it ever was. For instance, social media now allows you to sort of not just record, but also disseminate this at an alarming speed and to a wide audience. I mean, the kind of songs and the kind of markets that, you know, this pop culture would get till, say, about 15 years ago was rather limited, because these artists would have to go and perform in different places. They would have their cassettes coming out, which would again be sort of, you know, taken up by a limited number of audiences. But now with social media, those barriers have been broken. The other thing that social media, Ruchir, has done is that it is actively funding a lot of this pop culture, because these artists have YouTube channels which are monetized, which essentially means that YouTube is paying them sometimes as much as thousands of dollars a month to put out this content, right? So what's happening is, if I have a singing career which hasn't taken off, and I see a Kavi Singh doing that and you know, earning thousands of dollars and then being invited to various spaces, you know, having millions of followers online, I would sit there and say, maybe this seems like a very easy thing to do. You know, let me just jump on the bandwagon. So that's the other thing that has happened, because social media has also helped it grow so much. The scale of it is now much bigger than it ever was.
Right. So that kind of partially answers that curiosity. But Sandip and Ruchir, both of you write in the public space. You've got columns, you've got a radio. Have you experienced this kind of, you know, what he's talking about, the sort of phenomenon of popularizing hate speech or hate music?
No, I'll be frank, Anjum, when Kunal's book came out, like there's nothing in Kunal's book which I was familiar with until I read the book.
Wow, okay.
So, and that's why, you know, when the book came out, I really wanted to also talk to him, because it was a whole nother world. And I think many of us live in our bubbles. And, you know, this is not something that even gets covered in the, you know, our opinion pages, the left-right debates are, you know, between whatever, Shopon Dashgupta and somebody else on there. But this is not, you know,
Yeah,
I don't think even Shopon Dashgupta is aware, I'm speaking for him, but I don't want to, but is aware of these, the people that you're profiling in the book. This is like a whole nother.
I wouldn't be surprised if he is aware.
He may well be aware. They may be headlining.
But he may
opening.
wrinkle his nose at, you know, I mean.
But it also raises the question, when you were saying that, you know, people, two things that struck me when you were talking about what has changed when you asked about the genealogy. One is clearly the thing which we all benefit from, which is cheap mobile data, has fueled this revolution in a way that was not possible 20 years ago. You would have to get control of a radio station in Rwanda to say, you know, bring out the kill the cockroaches thing and out there. Now you can just do it in WhatsApp group. But the other thing that also struck me was, I wonder, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but when you say like people whose career is not going anywhere see this YouTube success and they like can monetize, whether a lot of this is also opportunistic nationalism versus actually ideologically driven?
It could be a fad. It could be half and half. I mean, you know, you don't actually think about things and then suddenly it starts paying you money and you think, oh yeah, it's a good idea to be, you know, Hindu fascist like this. But
what about in the cinema space or in the audiovisual space?
My question is slightly different, which is it mostly Hindi is one question.
Okay.
Or how much is it, what's the language breakdown as far as you can map?
Yeah, I mean, so with the limitation that I had, the content that I look at is mostly all of it is in Hindi, except in the publishing section where I talk of books that are also now being written in English. And, you know, increasingly the books are also getting translated into different languages. But the songs and the poetry that I've looked at is mostly all in Hindi. So, but I do also want to just, you know, sort of come to that point. Now, Kavi Singh, the singer, her first song is, you know, when the Pulwama terror attack happens way back in 2019. You know, she's never sung a song before in her life. Her father, who's a Haryanvi singer, decides to, you know, sort of make a singer out of her overnight, literally overnight. You know, one night she's singing in the kitchen, she's humming something when she's cooking, and the next morning she's in a studio because her father heard her humming, and he says, oh, you can sing, let's take you to the studio. So she sings a song around the Pulwama terror attack, where the song basically talks about how, you shouldn't be blaming the terrorists, you shouldn't be blaming Pakistan. The people you should be blaming are people who are living amongst us, by which she effectively means Muslims. Now, so, that song becomes an absolute viral hit. But after that, the songs that she releases are nothing close to as political. She has a very benign sounding song about how, there should be voter awareness, people should vote more. The next song is about how India has had a glorious history. So, nothing very outwardly political or nothing Hindutva in that sense. And none of those songs, even though she's put in more thought, more effort, more time, none of them become the kind of mad hits that, Pulwama was. So she's here thinking, hang on, what happened? I'm putting in more thought, I'm putting in more effort, I'm cranking up better tunes, and I'm not getting the success that Pulwama got me. My question is, what does that also then tell us about our society and about the kind of consumption that we're also seeing of this kind of pop culture? Because this wouldn't exist if there wasn't an audience for it.
But do you feel that happens also, I mean, as a columnist, I sometimes feel that something I've written that was a little more of a rant, that suddenly gets widely shared and viral versus something that I put a lot of thought into and deliberated the nuances, and then, we all want those likes and fames and that Kavi Singh wants, and then the next time I can also feel some internal thing in me pushing me towards a rant. I don't know about you.
I don't know. I have 2, 3 different modes. One is I will sometimes write something where I'm not saying anything particularly new, or I'm not giving a particularly new analysis of something, but I'm putting it in a different language or a cadence. And sometimes people do like that. And I think that's part of my job as a politically committed columnist, to actually not always go for trying to say something that's, I mean, obviously you try to be original, obviously you try and bring new insights to stuff, but sometimes you just need to say something baldly or in some formulation of words which is memorable or which stays with people. And so some of my columns are those. Other columns are more contemplative, more analytical, more, I've worked harder. What surprises me is both ways. Sometimes I'll write a column about meditating on a kitchen or the light in a room or something, and that'll go viral. Or one of these more posterish columns, as I would call them, go viral. It's the middle ones that don't go anywhere, but ones I really like, and they say, oh, no readership.
Also, sorry.
I'm thinking this traction thing, it's because you asked us if we've come across it. I certainly haven't. And I've not heard of this in Bangla. South India, I don't know enough about. Someone can enlighten us. I wouldn't be surprised if there was stuff like this in Gujarati or Rajasthani. And certainly in all the Bihari dialects and Hindi, Punjabi.
Yeah.
But South India, I haven't heard of it. Marathi, I don't know. Bengali, I haven't heard.
Yeah.
So, Anju, one quick point on that is, in reporting the book, the spread that I noticed was the north of India, parts of West India. Rajasthan, in fact, is a very, very big audience for people like Kavi Singh. What I did notice also was that in the southern spread of it, it's reached as far as at least Karnataka, where, Karnataka has become a big place where a lot of these songs are often played. If you go onto YouTube, you'll see, Ram Nami Yatras, Shobha Yatras, all of them playing these songs right outside mosques. So that is noticed. And when I was in Hyderabad, and this is not first-hand information, when I was in Hyderabad last week, someone told me that they've heard similar songs in Telugu as well.
Wow.
Now, I don't speak Telugu, so I've not been able to verify that. But there is also that evidence coming in now.
And is there any evidence of a counter attack using songs and poetry? Or because I know that some people have done rap, and I know leftists and people like us and city people, JNU types, JU types, that kind of thing. But is there any groundswell of protest using, again, the same medium of song or printed word.
There's definitely, I mean, I remember when the Ram temple was being consecrated, there was, I don't know how many of you have heard this, but there was a viral poem which went by the name Ram. And one of the lines in that poem said, "Zabardasti ke Jai Shri Ram mein sab kuch hai par Ram nahi," right? So that went viral. But again, I mean, I wouldn't call it a groundswell because I think what I see is isolated instances of maybe a counter narrative being pushed, nowhere close to the scale at which these guys are working, right? So there are instances. I mean, Kabir, music around Kabir, sort of his poetry being revived. I see attempts at that as well. So there are all of these narratives, but I don't think they've achieved the kind of fame and the popularity that some of these players have.
And it
And also
strikes
the
me.
other thing is that I do believe now, I didn't believe it earlier, but when Anand Patwardhan or someone says that Facebook is curtailing my spread, I've suddenly found that some of my more political posts which I post on Facebook are just not getting that much purchase as some of my more
Yeah. So you're-
apolitical columns. So I think anyone doing a counter narrative...
You just post a picture of yourself and then sneak in the column in the comments.
Oh, that's the new
Ah,
trend, is it?
but
That's why the comments.
No one's going to
Okay.
want
I've said this
to.
on
No one's
camera.
going to look at a picture of me. No, I
No,
think
there
a
was-
picture of somebody more attractive, and then sneak in the
Whatever
column.
you think.
Yeah.
works.
It's a
One
good
thing I
technique,
just
wow.
wanted to take up on your question as to whether there's a counter. Struck me that the counter would be songs of love, inclusion, love, which, I mean, you think back to Bhakti, you think back to...
No,
so
there could
I'm
be
not
angry
sure that there would
arguments
be...
against this also,
Yeah,
which might work
maybe.
with the youth. I mean, it should
That's
be
true.
love, but that's us.
Okay. Romantic generation. I just wanted to ask you, Kunal, you've been tracking these people, these three examples that you brought up as for a while. What's happening with their lives now? How do you see their trajectories?
So I mean, I don't want to give too much away because there is a bit of a suspense about, their lives as they stand now. But they're all committed to the Hindutva project, as I call it, I mean, they're all, in fact, some of them are doubly committed now. They're all gearing up for the 2024 elections. They're bringing out content which sort of peddles the Hindutva narrative. Some of them are very openly campaigning for the BJP, for Prime Minister Modi. So they're all sort of
Involved.
very involved, very actively involved, I would say, in the political project that they're a part of.
So, but what I will tell you, since we're not going to do spoilers, but I just want to build suspense and curiosity, is that the trajectories they haven't stayed where they were. There have been lots of big changes, interesting changes, and in relationships, in the way they've thought about things, in the stances that they've taken. So it's worth picking up the book to see what happens to each one of these individuals,
And
right?
can I add one quick thing is when you were saying that, that them gearing up for the elections, I was thinking, like for young people like that, producing that cultural content, this must be actually a tremendously exciting time when you feel like the songs and whatever you're producing is actually being used by political leaders at rallies and is part of the nation building project as it's happening, which is in direct contrast in some ways to the column you wrote, Ruchir, when there was the famous art show in Delhi and so many sort of well-known artists all contributed their little bits. And, there's this feeling that you don't know why they did it. Nobody's saying why they contributed. They did it willingly or they felt like they had to do it. So the energy level must be very, very different.
I imagine so. I think the way these people approach and the way the city, a compromised city intellectual, if I can call them that, approach it would be, I think, radically different. And yeah, no, I just want to hear the counter songs now. That's my main reaction to.
So that's your next project now, Kunal. You have to go in search of the counter songs.
And hope
yes?
it's not a very slim book.
Should we, anybody has any questions, comments? I suppose Aditya does, yes. Go for it. Do you pre-script your questions? Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Aditya. I guess Sandipda will be knowing that a lot of content polarization is happening is because of the way the algorithms are actually structured in the social media. Like the reason he is not coming across the posts you are actually seeing, because he is browsing as per his intellectual taste, which is not exactly of the Hindi belt. What content they are actually consuming in YouTube or Facebook or any other platform like Spotify, even if they browse 5 right-wing propaganda material, they will be flooded with 100 other options which are from the right wing and which are actually propaganda. This is how the algorithm is actually structured, the AI.
Right.
So we are only getting exposed to our past watch history, listen history, and that is why the main polarization is actually happening. And you have discovered a lot of content you have discovered because you were searching in that particular area. So now if you log into that profile, you will see a lot of content which is related with, and that is what the others are also seeing. That is what the right wingers are consuming.
Right. Okay.
And that way, there's a way to break it. What I have done is I've created like around 10 profiles in YouTube. So if I want to watch a particular type of content, I will log into that. I'll just watch films from Hindi. If I want to watch something, say right-wing material, if I want to watch, I'll just go and create a and keep an eye on YouTube with a particular right-wing profile.
Right. So we've actually been given 2 strategies in the course of today's conversation of how to deal with being...
Because as liberals, we should get exposed what the right wing is also saying, what the left wing is also saying, what the central is saying. But the algorithm is structured in such a way
that is
if
difficult to break out.
Through one profile, if we try to watch, it will flood us with related content.
Okay, thank you. So for once,
I'm
no
making
question.
Aditya my co-author on the next book.
Yeah. Thank you. That was interesting. Yes, lots of arms up. Sam, and then you're not Tanmay, are you? You are. Wow. Hi. Okay. Behind that beard. Yeah. And Kunal. Sam.
Yes. Kind of, in terms of one's surprise at all of this, one shouldn't really be surprised, given the long history of leftist songs. That can we just argue that they've learnt from the left? And also, I'm old enough to remember the exchange of cassettes, mainly with speeches in the early 90s, that were an absolutely central part of that early Karshevak movement. It was absolutely critical to it. So it's very much, almost it seems to me, in a trajectory that follows from both of those.
Yeah, that's what I was also thinking about when I was talking. Well, you want to respond? Sorry.
So, I mean, even the book looks at how it's not just the left. I mean, you mentioned the left, but actually, even Islamic extremist ideologies, for instance, I mean, not many people know this, but Osama bin Laden was quite a poet. I mean, his poetry was very well known. I mean, his poetry was very well received among those circles. There are poets who've been focusing on pushing the ISIS ideology. So there has been evidence of all kinds that, not just poetry, but different forms of popular culture. I mean, I've mentioned the genocide in Rwanda. I've mentioned what's happening in Myanmar as well. And I've looked at how popular culture has also played a role in both of these episodes. So popular culture has definitely been used in all of these contexts. About the dissemination, yes, I mean, as I mentioned during the Ram Mandir episode back in the late 80s and 90s, not just speeches, but songs would be played in public buses in UP. So that tradition has continued. As I said, I think the dissemination has now gotten so much easier. As Sandip also mentioned, I mean, it's now a lot easier. For instance, Kavi, I've gone with her to the recording studio. She only has a few lines jotted down. But within 3 hours, there's a song ready. Right? She records, she composes a tune, everything is done in 3 hours. So that has made it a lot easier for them to respond to events every day. I mentioned in my book how when the Article 370 was sort of revoked in Parliament, it was revoked in the Rajya Sabha on the first day. And as soon as Kavi and her father come to know that this has happened, they rush back in the evening to their homes by the next morning they have a song ready on Article 370. So when the Home Minister goes to the Lok Sabha, the song is already out on YouTube. And Indians with cheap data have searched for it and the song goes viral. So they've realized this.
Right. Next question, please. We're running out of time.
Hi, yes,
Hi.
I am Tanmay. Anjan,
Yeah,
hi.
okay. Welcome.
So I think you actually started talking about this. I'm very interested also in the world of cinema and film, because that's also pop culture. And I think the connection I want to make about that is did you, when you were reporting or like when you were like writing this book, did you see in your research whether the state also then kind of actively plays a part in encouraging this kind of content to be out there? Like the examples, in film, like, the film, I won't mention the names, but like the films which were given tax cuts or like, got more halls, for example, to be able to be played. And also now, like, I mean, as somebody from like, the film world, I can tell you that there's certain kinds of films which don't get funding anymore. And there's only certain kind of films which get funding, and as an actor, the kind of parts you're approached to play, like, if you want to make money now, you have to kind of sort of go towards a certain narrative. So I was just curious if it's similar in this, or is that also something that you're talking about or researching as well?
Well, that's question to you. Yeah.
So quickly, I mean, the book ends, if you read the book ends with saying that cinema is now the next frontier of sorts for the weaponization of popular culture. And I give examples. I mean, for instance, Kerala Story, Kashmir Files, the films that you didn't name, these films are already being used in some of these, by some of these subjects of mine, where they're creating content around it. So what they're doing is they're taking clips from these movies, they're creating poetry, they're creating songs around it, and then the two come together and that's presented as a video or a reel or whatever, right?
Has a Kavi Singh been approached by a filmmaker to sing in this?
Not yet, not to my knowledge yet.
That's
No.
the next frontier.
That is definitely the next frontier.
Right. So we're actually out of time. I'm sorry. One last question, very quick, please. I'm sorry, Kunur. What we can do is, because we need to clear the stage, but we can always continue the conversation and he can sign books and you can talk. Ask the question.
I want to go back to something you started your talk with regarding the power of the music that they're creating, right? So are the people who are creating the music aware of the fact that their music could like go from a creative point to a point where the lynching or the riot or a much bigger scale thing can happen? And did you have conversations like?
I mean, yes and no, because they see that they obviously are aware of the impact that it has on people's minds. What they sometimes don't see is whether it's it's going down to a certain procession which stops outside the mosque and plays that particular song, and then that leads to the lynching. So that might not be there might not be that knowledge. But I think these guys are, so I keep talking to them about this as well through my 4 years. And they're firmly convinced that what they're doing is right. They're firmly convinced that, the things that they say are things that deserve and need to be said in today's India. So that justification and that legitimization already sort of distances them from any consequence that their work will have tomorrow, because they feel these are important conversations to be had.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're going to have to, I've got this red screen with time's up with a big exclamation mark staring at me. So thank you very much for being here, for this being a great audience. Thank you, Kunal and Sandip and Ruchir.